The Phoenicians never called themselves Phoenicians. Greeks invented that name. And it might mean nothing more than purple people, a label based on what they sold, not who they were. The traders, merchants, and shipbuilders living along the Levantine coast in the first millennium BCE knew themselves by one thing only: their city. Not their nation, not their ethnicity, their city. That distinction, between a name others gave you and the identity you actually claimed, is the key to understanding one of the most consequential cultures in human history. This is no history. And this is what we actually get wrong about Phoenicians and early Mediterranean networks. When most people hear the word Phoenician, a specific picture forms: a unified civilization, a single people, maybe even an empire. I understood why I believed that. The name is singular. The legacy is enormous. It feels like it should belong to a nation. But the evidence doesn't support it. The people we call Phoenicians were Canaanite-speaking city-states, each with its own king, its own port, its own trade relationships, and its own political alliances. Tyre competed with Sidon. Sidon competed with Byblos. They traded with each other, yes, but they also undercut each other, allied with different foreign powers, and went to war over resources. The Greek word phoinikes appears in Homer, possibly as early as the 9th century BCE. It may derive from phoenix, crimson, or purple-red. In other words, Greeks may have named an entire civilization after the color of its most famous export. The people of Tyre called themselves Tyrians. The people of Sidon called themselves Sidonians. The word Phoenician, a Greek exonym, appears in none of their own inscriptions. They identified themselves by city. No unified ethnic label existed in their own records. So what held them together, if not a shared identity? The answer is the network itself. And to understand how that network formed, we need to go back nearly 5,000 years, to a port city, a forest, and a pharaoh who needed wood. Around 2600 BCE, Egypt had a problem. The Nile Valley was extraordinarily fertile, but it had almost no large timber. Building a navy required wood. Building temples required wood. Building the boats that would carry the dead into the afterlife required wood. Byblos had it. The city of Byblos, sitting on the coast of what is now northern Lebanon, had direct access to the cedar forests of the Lebanese mountains and a natural harbor that made export straightforward. From the Old Kingdom period onward, from around 2600 BCE, Byblos had established documented trade contact with Egypt. Cedar timber flowed south. Egyptian goods, gold, linen, grain, flowed north. The Palermo stone, a Dynasty V administrative record from around 2450 BCE, explicitly documents cedar shipments from the Levantine coast. This is one of the oldest documented long-distance trade relationships in history, and it tells us something important. The city-states we call Phoenician weren't latecomers to Mediterranean commerce. They were among its founders. Byblos grew wealthy enough that the Greeks eventually named their word for book, Byblos, after the city. Because papyrus, the Egyptian writing material, passed through Byblos on its way to the Greek world. The city was so central to the flow of information that its name became synonymous with writing itself. But Byblos wasn't just a waypoint for other people's goods. It was part of a much older story about writing, one that would eventually reshape every civilization that came after it. Somewhere between 1900 and 1700 BCE, in the turquoise mines of the Sinai Peninsula, workers began carving something new into stone. Not Egyptian hieroglyphs, not Mesopotamian cuneiform. Something simpler, fewer signs. Each sign representing a sound, not a whole word or syllable. These Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions are the earliest evidence of what would become alphabetic writing. The signs appear to be Semitic speakers adapting Egyptian pictographic principles to represent consonants in their own language. Scholars continue to debate the precise nature of this transition, whether Proto-Sinaitic constitutes a true proto-alphabet or a transitional system. But the broad lineage it represents is the mainstream view in epigraphy. The idea was radical in its simplicity. Instead of memorizing hundreds of signs, you needed fewer than 30. By around 1400 BCE, this principle had reached the Levantine coast. The city of Ugarit, a closely related Canaanite city north of Byblos, was flourishing as a major Bronze Age trade hub. Cuneiform alphabetic inscriptions from Ugarit provide some of the earliest clear and well-documented evidence of a true alphabet in the Levant. Ugarit's tablets show merchants, diplomats, and scribes using an alphabetic system to record trade, law, and literature. Then, around 1200 BCE, everything collapsed. Around 1200 to 1150 BCE, a period of catastrophic disruption swept the eastern Mediterranean, destroying or severely weakening almost every major power in the region simultaneously. Ugarit was burned and never rebuilt. The Hittite Empire collapsed. Mycenaean Greece fell into centuries of decline. Scholars continue to debate the precise causes, but the scale of the disruption is not in question. The Phoenician city-states survived, and into the commercial vacuum left by collapsed empires, they expanded. By around 1050 to 1000 BCE, by the 11th century BCE, the Phoenician abjad had emerged in its recognizable, standardized form. 22 consonantal letters written right to left with no vowels. What we can confirm is that this system had roots in earlier writing experiments stretching back centuries, but it represents the most clearly documented alphabetic ancestor of all later scripts. Here is where a common claim needs careful handling. The Phoenicians did not invent the alphabet. They refined and standardized a writing system with roots stretching back centuries before them. What they did, and this matters, is spread it. The Greeks adapted the Phoenician abjad and added vowels, creating the first true alphabet in the modern sense. Latin derived from Greek. The Arabic and Hebrew scripts developed along a parallel Semitic branch. Every writing system you have ever used traces back, through the Phoenicians, to those mine worker inscriptions in the Sinai. Now we return to those shells. The Murex trunculus is a small sea snail, thumbnail-sized, spiky, unremarkable to look at. But inside each snail, in a gland near its digestive system, sits a small quantity of a chemical precursor. When exposed to sunlight and air, that chemical transforms into a purple dye of extraordinary stability. It does not fade. It does not wash out. Centuries later, archaeologists find textiles still holding their color. Ancient sources describe the process as deeply unpleasant. The decomposing snails produced an odor that permeated entire neighborhoods. Tyre's dye workshops were kept at the city's edge, downwind, and the yield was almost nothing. Modern experimental archaeology confirms what ancient writers described. It took roughly 12,000 snails to produce a single gram of pure Tyrian purple. A standard Roman toga required approximately 100 grams of dye, meaning the processing of more than 1 million snails for a single garment. That calculation alone places fully purple-dyed clothing among the most costly objects in the ancient world. Roman emperors eventually restricted its use, Only the emperor could wear full Tyrian purple. To be born in the purple, porphyrogenetos, meant born to the imperial family. The color became synonymous with supreme power across the Mediterranean world for over 1,000 years. According to both biblical and ancient sources, Hiram I of Tyre, who ruled in the 10th century BCE, understood this leverage precisely. He supplied cedar and craftsmen to King Solomon for the construction of the Jerusalem temple, a relationship documented in Hebrew scripture and referenced in Phoenician and Assyrian records as a major regional trade partnership. His city controlled something no one else could easily replicate: the snails, the technique, and the coastline to harvest both. According to biblical and ancient sources, Ithobal I, known in Hebrew sources as Ethbaal, extended Tyre's reach further still. He is documented in Phoenician and Assyrian records as a major regional power broker, and Hebrew scripture identifies his daughter as Jezebel, who married into the Israelite royal family. Tyre's commercial and political networks reached inland through marriage as readily as they reached outward through trade.
But here is what I kept coming back to when I looked at all of this.
None of these city-states needed to be unified to accomplish any of it. This is the thing that changes how you read the whole story. We assume that lasting power requires political unity, an empire, a shared flag, a central authority that can project force. The Phoenicians did something different. They built a network. Each city-state was autonomous. Each made its own alliances, its own deals, its own enemies. When Assyria conquered Tyre, Sidon continued trading. When Babylon pressured Sidon, Tyre's western colonies carried on independently. Among those western colonies was Carthage. Archaeological evidence confirms Tyrian origins for the city, founded around 814 BCE. Ancient tradition attributes its founding to a Tyrian princess known as Dido, or Elissa. Whether this figure was historical or legendary, the founding itself represents exactly this pattern. When Tyre faced political pressure at home, its traders didn't wait for a central authority to solve the problem. They built a new node. Carthage would eventually become one of the most powerful cities in the ancient Mediterranean, independent, self-governing, and more than capable of challenging Rome. It was not a Phoenician colony in any subordinate sense. It was a new city-state, following the same model as its founders. The revelation here is not complicated. The Phoenicians were powerful not because they were unified, but because they didn't need to be. Their competitors, the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, all built systems that depended on a center. When the center failed, the system failed. The Phoenicians built something that could absorb loss. Individual cities fell, the network adapted. And the alphabet they refined and spread was itself a network technology. It didn't belong to any single city. It couldn't be confiscated when a city fell. Once the Greeks had it, once the Arameans had it, once the traders of the Western Mediterranean had it, it was beyond anyone's control. We reconstruct the past from what survives: objects, names, and the contradictions between how others saw us and who we actually were. The Phoenicians left us no unified history of themselves, no royal annals claiming dominion over a Phoenician nation, no founding myth of a single Phoenician people. What they left was more durable than any archive. The Phoenician abjad vanished from use within centuries of Alexander's conquests, but the script it spawned outlived every empire that ever tried to conquer the cities that carried it. This coast, these cities, these traders, they didn't build a monument to themselves. They built a system. And systems, when they're well designed, outlast the people who built them. What city-state identity would you choose if you lived in Tyre or Sidon? And why do you think that choice mattered more than a shared ethnic label? I'm here to help you know the builders of the past and the networks they left behind. Next time, the networks that outlasted the people who built them. See you on the next trade route.